They lock you in at Blackwood and Sons after midnight. Old Man Blackwood says it's standard procedure out here in the Nevada desert. Keeps the coyotes out, deters the bored kids from Dust Devil Creek looking for morbid kicks. He doesn't tell you the real reason, that the heavy oak door and its deadbolt aren't primarily about keeping things out. They're about keeping you in, alone with the quiet, the cold, and the specific set of rules for dealing with whatever wakes up when the sun bleeds away behind the western mesas. My name is Alex Carter. This job, night attendant at the most isolated funeral home I've ever seen, wasn't my first choice. It was my only choice. Came here running from the wreckage of a different life in Phoenix. A life scorched by one moment of frozen inaction during a crisis. A failure that cost someone else everything and me. Well, it cost me enough to end up here, desperate for any work that paid cash and asked few questions. Maybe tending to the dead felt like a fitting penance for failing the living. Or maybe I just needed a place where the silence was deep enough to drown out the echoes in my own head. Blackwood and Sons Funeral Home stands alone off a 2-lane highway, a stark white mission-style building against the vast empty backdrop of sand, scrub and distant heat-hazed mountains. By day, it probably looks peaceful, dignified. By night, under a sky brittle with stars, it feels like an outpost on the edge of nowhere, profoundly isolated. Inside, the air conditioning fights a losing battle against the memory of the day's heat, creating a clammy, artificial cold that doesn't quite mask the underlying sense. Sharp formaldehyde, cloying lilies from the viewing room, wreaths delivered earlier by Sarah from the flower shop in town, her sympathetic glance lingering on me as she hurried away before dusk, and the faint, pervasive smell of dust and something indescribably old. Mr. Silas Blackwood himself finalized my orientation just as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the desert sky in violent streaks of orange and purple. He's older than the dust, it seems, tall and rail-thin in a formal, old-fashioned dark suit. His face a mask of stoic professionalism, eyes pale and watchful beneath bushy white eyebrows. He moved with a quiet precision, locking cabinets, checking thermostats, his movements economical, almost ritualistic. He led me to the small, sparsely furnished attendant's office near the back, adjacent to the cold, humming preparation suite. "This is your station," he stated, his voice dry as the desert wind. "Phone, logbook, coffee machine." He pointed to the heavy, solid core door, reinforced steel frame. "Deadbolt functions from the inside only. This is your designated safe area should protocols necessitate immediate retreat." Safe area? Protocols necessitating retreat? My stomach tightened. He fixed me with his pale eyes. "Carter," he began, his tone dropping, becoming even more serious. "Working alone here at night requires diligence and absolute adherence to procedure. Not just the state regulations, the house regulations, for your safety and for the proper repose of our clients." He handed me a small laminated card. "Blackwood and Sons. Night shift protocols. Mandatory. 1. Embalming suite security. All preparation instruments, trocars, scalpels, forks, etc. must be cleaned, returned to locked cabinets, and the suite door secured prior to unattended periods, especially overnight. No exceptions." His gaze flickered towards the locked cabinets lining the hallway outside the prep room. "Why? What happens if they're left out?" 2. Auditory anomalies. Post hours. Should you perceive the distinct sound of metallic implements being handled, characterized by light clinking, shifting or scraping on metal surfaces, emanating from secured areas after Mr. Blackwood has departed, you are to immediately cease current activity. Secure yourself in the designated office safe area if possible, and do not investigate the source of the sound. Wait for cessation. My mind raced. Or what would be handling surgical steel in locked rooms after hours? 3. Preparation suite anomaly. Upon arriving for your designated shift, Prior to commencing any other duties, perform a visual check of the primary preparation suite. If a deceased client is found positioned upon the embalming table who was not previously placed there by yourself or Mr. Blackwood, and is not listed on the immediate intake schedule, retreat immediately to the designated office safe area. Bolt the door from inside. Do not emerge for any reason until sunrise or until Mr. Blackwood personally unlocks the door from the outside. Activate emergency alert beacon if necessary. Pure ice slid down my spine, a body appearing on the table, and the prescribed reaction wasn't call the police, but lock yourself in the office. I looked up from the card, my mouth dry. Mr. Blackwood, these protocols, are these common? They are the protocols for this establishment, Carter, he replied evenly, his expression unreadable. Follow them without deviation, without question. Your predecessor, he paused, adjusting his tie, found deviation inadvisable. He walked me to the main entrance, the heavy oak door, solid and imposing. He checked the generator panel beside it. Generator kicks in if the grid fails, but keep an eye on the fuel. Flashlight and spare batteries in the office desk drawer. Batteries might be old, check them. Resource scarcity hint. Then he stepped outside, pulling the door shut. I heard the distinct heavy clank of multiple deadbolts sliding into place from the outside. Locked in until morning, the silence that descended felt absolute, pressing in on me. I was alone. Truly alone. In a locked funeral home in the middle of the Nevada desert, armed with a set of insane rules and a flashlight with possibly dying batteries. My past failure, freezing, hesitating, felt like a lifetime ago. But the fear of inaction warred now with the terrifying prospect of what action might be required here, or what horrors inaction was meant to prevent. I did my first walkthrough, keys jingling softly, described sound. In the quiet, the only sound besides the low hum of the air conditioning, and my own footsteps echoing on the polished linoleum. Viewing room A, viewing room B, empty, smelling faintly of lilies and furniture polish. Chairs arranged in neat, expectant rows. Casket display room, polished wood gleaming under soft spotlights. Silent occupants waiting. Embalming suite, locked tight. The air near the door feeling noticeably colder. Basement access, locked. Casket storage, locked. Everything secure. Everything quiet. Too quiet. Back in the small office. The safe room. I checked the flashlight. The beam was weak, yellowish. The spare batteries in the drawer looked corroded. Great. The logbook lay open on the desk. Previous entries sparse, professional. I made my first entry. 21-0. Shift start. Premises secure. All protocols reviewed. As I wrote, a faint, almost inaudible scraping sound seemed to come from the direction of the embalming room hallway, like metal dragging lightly on stone. I froze, pen hovering, straining my ears. Silence, just the hum of the AC, old building settling, desert wind against an outside pipe, or the first test. My heart pounded. The night stretched before me, long and uncertain, governed by silence, shadows, and 3 deeply disturbing rules. The first week passed in a haze of eerie quiet and mundane tasks. Cleaning the viewing rooms, polishing caskets I tried not to think too hard about, updating intake forms under the buzzing fluorescent lights of the small office designated as my safe room. The silence was the loudest thing, broken only by the low, steady hum of the building's climate control and the distant sigh of the wind across the Nevada flats outside. I found myself listening intently to that silence, parsing every creak of the old building, every shift in the ventilation's rhythm. My nerves stretched thin by the memory of Blackwood's rules and the heavy clank of the deadbolts he engaged after, locking me in each night. My past mistake, freezing during that apartment fire back in Phoenix, costing precious seconds, haunted the quiet hours. It fueled a meticulous, almost obsessive adherence to procedure now. Checklists were double-checked. Doors confirmed, locked multiple times. Schedules reviewed constantly. Failure wasn't an option here. The stakes felt infinitely higher than just a job. I saw Sarah at the Desert Bloom florist next door when I picked up arrangements for a viewing. Her bright chatter about town gossip and the upcoming meteor shower felt like a broadcast from another planet. "You holding up okay over there, Alex?" she asked, arranging lilies with practiced hands, her cheerfulness faltering slightly as she glanced towards the imposing white facade of Blackwood and Sons. "Place still gives me the creeps after dark. And you're in there all night? It's quiet," I said, the understatement feeling vast. "Pays the bills." "Yeah, well," she shuddered slightly. "Rather you than me. Old man Blackwood. Nice enough, but intense. And folks say weird things happen around that place." She leaned closer. "Like lights flicking on in the embalming room late at night when no one's supposed to be there." My stomach tightened. I forced a shrug. Old wiring, probably. But her words lingered long after I returned to the funeral home's artificial chill. The first test of the rules came not through negligence, but perhaps through Blackwood himself. He'd had me assist with the late afternoon preparation before my shift officially began, emphasizing the need for meticulous cleanup afterwards. "Leave nothing out, Carter," he'd stressed, his pale eyes sweeping over the gleaming steel instruments. Respect for the tools. Respect for the process. Exhausted after he finally left and locked me in, I did my usual fastidious cleanup of the embalming suite. Checked the locked cabinets twice, secured the room, but when I came in the next night for my shift, did my initial walkthrough, and unlocked the embalming suite door, my blood ran cold. There, resting precisely in the center of the gleaming sterile steel table, was a single instrument, a long, slender, wickedly sharp trocar, used for aspiration. It glinted under the harsh overhead light. It hadn't been there. I knew I had locked it away with the others. Had Blackwood left it as a test? Or had something else retrieved it? Rule 1. Never leave the embalming tools out overnight. The implication wasn't just about tidiness. It was about access. My hand trembled as I reached for it. The steel felt colder than the room's ambient temperature, an unnatural biting cold that seemed to cling to my skin even after I'd snatched it up and hastily, almost guiltily, locked it back inside the heavy glass-fronted cabinet with the others. I checked the lock twice, then backed out of the room, securing the door behind me, feeling watched, judged. The rule wasn't just a suggestion. It was a defense against something that sought these specific, intimate tools of the trade. The violation, intentional or not, felt like leaving a weapon out for an unseen intruder. The rest of the night was quiet, almost unnervingly so. I tried focusing on paperwork in the office, the designated safe room, but my ears strained against the silence, listening for any hint of activity. The flashlight Blackwood had left felt inadequate, its beam weak, the spare batteries visibly corroded. Resource management, I thought grimly, making a mental note to buy my own. Then just after 2 a.m., I heard it. Faint at first, then unmistakable, drifting from the direction of the locked embalming room down the silent corridor. A soft metallic shifting sound, followed by the delicate, distinct clink of surgical steel instruments being moved against each other, perhaps rearranged on a metal tray. My heart slammed against my ribs. My heart slammed against my ribs. Rule 2. If you hear metal clinking after hours, do not investigate. It wasn't loud. It was precise. Almost careful. Like someone meticulously selecting tools. My imagination supplied horrifying images. Unseen hands arranging scalpels, forceps, trocars. Preparing for what? The urge to look, to crack open the office door and peer down the corridor towards the embalming suite, was almost overwhelming. My past inaction screamed at me. Don't just sit here. Investigate. But Rule 2, backed by Blackwood's grave tone and the chilling implication of the tool left on the table, felt absolute. This wasn't a fire alarm. This was a specific warning against confronting the source of that particular sound. My breath hitched as the faint clinking seemed to pause, followed by a soft scraping sound, like metal being drawn across the steel table. Then, silence again. I remained frozen, huddled in the relative safety of the office, listening intently. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Nothing more. Had it finished? Or was it waiting? The silence felt more menacing than the sound had been. Later, near dawn, I cautiously checked the hallway. Empty. The embalming room door remained locked, cold to the touch, offering no answers, only reinforcing the terror of the unknown operating just beyond a locked door. The memory of the clinking instruments haunted the following nights. Rule 2 wasn't just about avoiding a spooky noise. It was about avoiding direct confrontation with whatever entity handled those tools with such chilling precision. Sleep became a luxury, punctuated by nightmares of gleaming scalpels moving on their own. I started bringing a heavier flashlight, checking its batteries obsessively. The funeral home, once just a quiet, slightly morbid workplace, now felt like enemy territory I had to navigate with stealth and extreme caution. The entity, or whatever it was, seemed to grow bolder, or perhaps my senses grew sharper, attuned to its presence. I'd feel sudden, inexplicable drops in temperature while walking corridors, catch fleeting movements in my peripheral vision. Shadows detaching from corners, then gone when I looked directly. Once, cleaning the main viewing room, I felt a distinct, cold pressure brush past my arm, accompanied by the faint, lingering scent of formaldehyde. Though the room had been empty for days, my interactions with Sarah at the flower shop became my only anchor to sanity. I needed the bright normality of her shop, the scent of living things, roses, carnations, baby's breath, a stark contrast to the lilies and chemical sharpness next door. I started confiding in her more. Not the full truth about the rules, but about the intense creepiness, the sounds, the feeling of being watched. Honestly, Alex, she said one afternoon, trimming thorns from roses, her brow furrowed with concern. Everyone knows Blackwood and Sons is weird. Old man Blackwood keeps to himself, hires night staff who never seem to last more than a few months. People talk. Lights seen late at night, strange deliveries. One lady swore she saw someone looking out of the upstairs window last year, but Mr. Blackwood sealed that floor off decades ago. Sealed off, my attention sharpened. Yeah, the original residence, I think. Bad business up there long before your time. He never goes up, keeps it locked tight. She shivered. Seriously, find another job. This place isn't worth whatever he's paying. Her words confirmed my own growing unease about the building's history, about Blackwood's role. Was he just managing the phenomena, or somehow involved? That night, I pressed him cautiously. Mr. Blackwood, I began during the brief shift handover, the noises, the clinking I logged last week. Is it just the building? Or something else? Blackwood finished locking the main tool cabinet in the embalming room hallway, his movements precise. He turned, his pale eyes fixing on me. It is the consequence of proximity to transition, Carter, he said cryptically. This building stands on a threshold. Some linger. Some are drawn here by the work we do. He paused. Rule 2 is for your protection. Investigating invites interaction. Interaction complicates the settling process. Settling process? The dead require quiet preparation, he stated flatly. The presence interferes. It attempts its own preparations, handles the tools when it can. Rule 1 denies it implements. Rule 2 advises avoidance of its activity. Simple procedural hygiene. His explanation was chillingly detached. framing supernatural horror as a contamination risk. He then pointed to a heavy iron bar leaning in a dark corner of the basement stairwell access. That stays there for emergencies, wedging doors. Nothing else. A hint? A tool? His confirmation that the presence handled tools and attempted its own preparations solidified my fear. This wasn't just residual energy. It was interactive, purposeful in its own disturbing way. The following Monday morning, I arrived for my night shift 10 minutes early. The desert air was cooling rapidly as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky brilliant orange. I unlocked the heavy front door, the familiar click echoing in the twilight stillness. Stepped inside, reaching for the light switch. Standard procedure. Quick walkthrough, check all rooms secure before Blackwood arrived for the final lockup. I headed towards the back, towards the embalming suite, intending to check the chemical supplies. Turned the corner into the short hallway where the suite door stood, and froze. The embalming room door, the one I knew I had locked securely at the end of my last shift, the one Blackwood also checked, was standing slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness within. A faint, almost imperceptible hum emanated from the room, and the sharp smell of formaldehyde was suddenly overwhelmingly strong. My heart leaped into my throat. I hadn't touched this door. Blackwood hadn't arrived yet. Rule of 3 flashed in my mind, stark and absolute. If a body is already on the table when you arrive for your shift, retreat immediately to the designated safe room of Blackwood's office, and do not emerge until sunrise or until Mr. Blackwood personally unlocks the door from the outside. Was there a body? I hadn't even looked inside yet, but the open door, the overwhelming chemical smell, the wrongness of it. It felt like the prerequisite, the warning sign. The presence was already active. Preparing. Terror surged, overriding procedure, overriding curiosity. This wasn't a test I was willing to take. I didn't look inside, didn't hesitate. I spun around and ran. Back through the silent funeral home, my footsteps echoing frantically now. Reached a small, designated office near the front. Slammed the reinforced door shut. Threw the heavy deadbolt on the inside. The solid clank of the bolt locking was the most reassuring sound I'd heard all night. I collapsed against the door, chest heaving, listening to the silence outside the office. Trapped inside the safe room, inside the locked funeral home, waiting for sunrise, wondering what exactly was arranging itself on the steel table in the embalming room down the hall. Rule 3 wasn't just a warning. It was an escape hatch I had just barely thrown myself through. Hours crawled by in the locked office, the designated safe room. The only illumination came from the weak emergency light above the door, and the dying beam of my personal flashlight, which I used sparingly, terrified the batteries wouldn't last the night. Outside the reinforced door, the funeral home was utterly silent. No clinking metal, no footsteps, no whispers, just a heavy waiting stillness that felt far more menacing than noise. I checked my phone. No service, of course. The landline on the desk, dead. Blackwood likely cut it off remotely during Rule 3 events. Complete isolation. My heart hammered against my ribs. The memory of the slightly ajar embalming room door, the overwhelming chemical smell, played over and over. What was happening out there? Was it moving through the halls now? Was it finishing its preparation? Panic gave way to a cold, gnawing dread. I took stock of the office. Small, functional, desk, chair, filing cabinet, locked, the dead landline, the logbook. The heavy iron bar Blackwood had pointed out leaned in one corner. Meant for wedging doors, he'd said. Against what? I dragged it closer to my chair, its weight a small, inadequate comfort. In the desk drawer, beneath spare log sheets, I found the corroded spare batteries for the company flashlight. Useless, and something else. A small velvet pouch containing several objects that looked like antique silver surgical probes or styluses intricately etched with symbols I didn't recognize. Blackwood hadn't mentioned these. Were they his, or left by a predecessor, another layer of mystery. I left them in the drawer to combat the encroaching terror. I turned to research, using the intermittent, weak signal my personal phone occasionally picked up near the office window. I searched for Blackwood and Sons history, Dust Devil Creek disappearances, anything related to Rule 3 scenarios. Found little beyond Zara's earlier findings. Vague ligands, missing persons reports decades old, rumors about the Blackwood family's reclusiveness. Then, a hit on an obscure paranormal forum. A post from 5 years ago. User Night Attendant in hand, describing working at an isolated Nevada funeral home with 3 insane rules. Rule 1, Rule 2. Then Rule 3, body on table tree, get out. Don't look, run. Last guy didn't. They found his car empty miles away. The post ended abruptly. The user account was deleted. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just Blackwood's procedure. It was known. It was lethal. As the hours dragged, the silence outside the office began to change. A faint, rhythmic scraping sound began, seeming to come from the hallway ceiling or vents. Soft thuds echoed intermittently from the direction of the casket display room. My flashlight beam, growing weaker, danced nervously around the small office. The temperature dropped noticeably, my breath misting in the air. It was getting closer, or waking up more fully. Then, a soft scratching started at the office door itself, like fingernails, or perhaps metal, dragging lightly across the reinforced steel. I froze, gripping the heavy iron bar, flashlight beam fixed on the door. The scratching stopped, followed by a series of soft, deliberate taps, low down on the door. My heart felt like it would explode. It knew I was in here. It was testing the defenses. I remained utterly silent, holding my breath, remembering the absolute stillness required during the Rule 3 clock event in the library story. Focus, Alex. Remembering the silence needed now. The tapping stopped. A long pause. Then, the sound of something heavy being dragged slowly away down the corridor. It retreated, for now, but the terror lingered, thick and suffocating. This wasn't just about avoiding investigation. It was about active confinement, waiting out a predator. Dawn was still hours away. My flashlight beam was fading rapidly, casting long, dancing shadows. The last set of spare batteries I carried myself were nearly drained from the prolonged use. Soon, I'd be in near total darkness, armed only with an iron bar and 3 terrifying rules. Just as true despair began to set in, I heard it. The distant, unmistakable sound of a heavy vehicle approaching on the desert highway, turning onto the funeral home's gravel drive. Headlights swept briefly across the small window high in my office wall. Then the familiar clank of the main entrance deadbolts being undone from the outside. Blackwood. He was back early. Or maybe he knew. Maybe the Rule 3 event triggered some silent alert only he received. Heavy footsteps approached my office. A key slid into the lock. The deadbolt turned. The door opened. Mr. Blackwood stood there, silhouetted against the dim hallway light. His face was grim, pale, but calm. He took in my state, huddled, clutching the iron bar, flashlight beam nearly dead, then glanced down the hall towards the embalming room, now silent. Active night was all he said, his voice quiet. Rule 3. I nodded, unable to speak. You retreated here immediately? I nodded again. Good, he said, stepping aside. It has passed. The preparations are reset. Safe to emerge. He looked down at the iron bar in my hand, then the velvet pouch in the open desk drawer containing the silver tools. A flicker of something unreadable crossed his eyes. Almost sunrise, he continued, turning away. Loga time you entered this room due to Protocol 3. Nothing else. Then begin prepping the suite for the Carson arrival at 7. He walked away, leaving me standing shaky in the doorway. The ordeal over, yet fundamentally changed. I had survived Rule 3, followed the procedure, But the entity felt more real, more dangerous than ever. And Blackwood, his calm acceptance, his knowledge. What exactly was he the custodian of? My eyes fell on the velvet pouch in the drawer again. The silver tools. He had noticed them. And his earlier hint? Different metal. Combined with the iron bar. Maybe these weren't just random protocols. Maybe they hinted at defenses, at weapons. The thought was terrifying, but also sparked a tiny, desperate ember of agency. I couldn't just hide it anymore. I needed to be ready for the next time. The embalming room door stood slightly ajar, a dark invitation. The overwhelming scent of formaldehyde, sharp and stinging, confirmed my worst fear even before Rule 3 fully registered. A body lay on the table, unscheduled, unlocked, and the soft, insistent metallic clinking sound starting up from the tool cabinet across the room told me I hadn't arrived before the guest of honor. It was already here, active. Retreat immediately to the designated safe room. Rule 3 screamed in my mind. But the clinking wasn't distant this time. It was in the room. Retreat meant turning my back, crossing the open space while it was selecting its instruments. My past failure. The paralysis that cost someone else everything. Warred with the protocol. Not again. Not like this. My hand instinctively tightened on the iron faucet handle I'd retrieved earlier, its weight surprisingly substantial. My other hand slipped into my jacket pocket, fingers closing around the smooth, cool velvet pouch containing the Founder's silver probes. Adrenaline surged, cold and sharp, overriding the fear with a desperate, cornered animal instinct. Holding the iron handle low, partially concealed, I pushed the embalming room door fully open and stepped inside, forcing myself to project a calm I absolutely did not feel. The room was colder than usual, the air vibrating with that low hum I recognized from the archive search. The sheet-draped figure on the table seemed unnaturally still. Across the room, the glass door of the main instrument cabinet visibly rattled. The clinking inside grew louder, more frantic, like something searching impatiently. Then it stopped. Silence descended again, thick and expectant. A column of shadow detached itself from the corner near the rattling cabinet, coalescing into a tall, impossibly thin shape, indistinct but radiating palpable cold and a focused, predatory intelligence. Its movement was accompanied by a faint, dry rustling sound, like wind through desert scrub. It ignored me for a moment, flowing silently towards the table where the body lay. It reached out a shadowy tendril towards the sheet. No. The word tore from my throat, rough and loud in the sterile room. Step away. The shadow froze, turned its attention towards me. The cold intensified dramatically. The humming deepened, becoming a low, guttural growl formed of static and something that sounded chillingly like metal scraping bone. It recognized the challenge. It recognized the threat. It surged towards me, not floating, but flowing across the floor with unnatural speed, shadowy tendrils whipping out. I didn't hesitate, bringing the heavy iron faucet handle around in a hard, desperate arc. I aimed for the densest part of the shadow, a jarring, crackling sound, like ice shattering combined with high-voltage static, erupted as the cold iron passed through the shadow. The entity recoiled with a high-pitched electronic screech, its form flickering violently, dispersing slightly, like smoke hit by a sudden wind. Iron hurt it, disrupted its physical manifestation. It retreated momentarily, hovering near the tool cabinet again, the humming growl intensifying with rage. But it didn't dissipate. It reformed, darker now, the shadows within swirling faster. It wasn't done. Remembering Blackwood's words, Silver interferes, disrupts the connection. I pulled one of the antique silver probes from the velvet pouch. It felt unnaturally heavy, cool but humming faintly with contained energy. The entity surged forward again, faster this time, tendrils lashing out, aiming for my face. I didn't swing the iron this time. I stood my ground, gripped a silver probe like a dagger, and thrust its pointed tip directly into the coalescing darkness lunging at me. A blinding flash of white light exploded from the point of contact, accompanied by a deafening roar of static and wrenching metal. The force threw me backwards against the cold steel table, knocking the wind out of me. The silver probe felt white-hot in my hand for a second before cooling rapidly. When my vision cleared, the shadow was gone, utterly vanished. The room was silent again, except for my own ragged gasping. The intense cold was rapidly dissipating. The lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. On the floor where the shadow had been, a small patch of frost quickly sublimated, leaving only a damp spot. Near the tool cabinet, a single scalpel lay on the floor, as if dropped. I stayed there, leaning against the table, shaking uncontrollably, sucking in air that no longer felt quite so frigid or menacing. I had faced it. I had used the tools Blackwood hinted at, and I had somehow forced it back. The silver probe in my hand felt strangely inert now, its faint hum gone. The iron handle felt just like cold metal, but they had worked, for now. The adrenaline crash left me weak-kneed, leaning against the embalming table, the silence of the room pressing in. The body beneath the sheet remained still, undisturbed. The scalpel lay gleaming on the floor near the cabinet. The only evidence of the confrontation was my own trembling body, the lingering scent of ozone, and the profound, unnatural quiet. I cautiously retrieved the fallen scalpel, using sterile forceps, cleaned it, and locked it securely away in the cabinet, my hands still shaking. Then, methodically, almost robotically, I checked every other cabinet, every drawer, everything secure. Rule 1, retroactively enforced with extreme prejudice. The iron faucet handle felt ordinary again. The silver probe, however, holding it, I could still feel a faint, residual coolness, a subtle vibration, like a tuning fork recently struck. This wasn't just metal. It was imbued with something else, keyed somehow to the presence that haunted this place. I couldn't stay in the embalming room. Retreating to the relative safety of the office, I bolted the door, propped the heavy iron bar against it just in case, and sank into the chair, trying to process. The rules were for avoidance, but avoidance had failed when the entity manifested before I arrived. I had been forced to engage, to use the Founder's kit, as Blackwood might call them. And it had worked, which meant Blackwood knew it would work. He knew confrontation was possible, survivable, just incredibly dangerous. And he hadn't told me directly, only hinted. Why? Testing me? Or afraid to admit the rules weren't foolproof? Blackwood returned the following evening, his arrival announced by the familiar heavy clank of the main door bolts. I met him in the hall, deliberately holding the iron bar, letting the velvet pouch with the silver probe be visible in my jacket pocket. His eyes flickered over me, noting my exhaustion, the slight tremor I couldn't hide, the iron bar. He looked towards the embalming room, then back at me, his expression unreadable. "Quiet night?" he asked, his voice neutral. "Not entirely," I replied, meeting his gaze. "We had unscheduled activity in the prep suite upon my arrival. Protocol Gamma was enacted, followed by active deterrence. Blackwood's composure didn't break, but I saw a flicker of something in his pale eyes. Surprise? Respect? Fear? Report," he said simply. I told him everything. The body on the table. The body on the table. The clinking starting while I was there. The shadow manifesting. Using the iron handle, the silver probe. The entity recoiling, dissipating. He listened intently. Silently. When I finished, he nodded slowly. "The Founder's kit," he murmured, looking at the iron bar, then the pouch in my pocket. "You used them. You hinted they might work?" I countered. "Hinting and doing are different worlds, Carter," he said grimly. "Those tools." Yes. They disrupt it. Cold iron grounds its physical attempts. The silver interferes with whatever energy it uses to manifest, causes it pain, disorientation. He sighed, rubbing his temples. They were crafted by my great-grandfather after his first direct confrontation, based on older desert lore and his own experiments. But using them is drawing its direct attention, inviting retribution. The rules are designed to avoid that, to keep the peace, such as it is. The peace was broken when I arrived to find a body already laid out. I retorted. The rules failed. He couldn't argue with that. Yes, he conceded heavily. It happens. Its activity waxes and wanes. Sometimes it becomes impatient, bolder. He looked at me, truly looked at me. You survived direct engagement using the kit. That hasn't happened since, well, since before my time as sole proprietor. My grandfather warned against it. Yet it creates a bond, marks you. So I'm marked. You're aware, he corrected softly, and it is aware of you differently now. It knows you can hurt it. It will be cautious, or more cunning. He paused. I am less capable than I once was, Carter. Maintaining the boundaries, the protocols. It takes its toll. The unspoken implication hung heavy in the air. He needed help. He needed someone who could actively defend the space if necessary. The tools are your responsibility now, he said finally, gesturing towards the iron bar, the pouch. Learn them. Respect them. Use them only when the rules fail, when retreat is impossible. They are the last resort, the custodian's burden. He turned, walking towards his private office, leaving me standing alone in the hallway, the weight of the iron bar suddenly immense, the silver probes feeling both cold and strangely alive against my hip. My role here had irrevocably changed. Months later, the rhythm of Blackwood and Son settled into a new, tense normalcy. I still worked the night shift, still endured the profound isolation of the Nevada desert night, but my role was different. Mr. Blackwood, citing his age and health, handled mostly daytime arrangements and paperwork, leaving the long, dark hours solely to me. He trusted me, perhaps out of necessity, perhaps out of a grim respect earned that night in the embalming room. Our handovers were brief, focused on logistics, but sometimes his pale eyes held a silent question, an acknowledgement of the shared unspoken burden. Zara remained my lifeline to the outside world, though our conversations were often strained by the things I couldn't tell her. She knew I'd stayed, knew the job was affecting me, saw the weariness in my eyes, but she stopped asking probing questions, respecting the boundary I couldn't explain. Her deliveries of lilies or sympathy arrangements were moments of bright, fragile normalcy in the house of the dead. The presence remained. It was a constant, low-level hum beneath the silence, an awareness that never fully receded, but its behavior had changed since the confrontation. It seemed more cautious, wary. Rule 1 became my first line of active defense. Every tool was meticulously cleaned, accounted for, locked away not just with keys, but with small iron filings sprinkled across the cabinet threshold, based on lore Blackwood reluctantly shared. Leaving anything accessible felt like baiting a dangerous animal. Rule 2, the clinking, still occurred, perhaps once or twice a week, usually from the embalming room, or, disturbingly, sometimes from the casket storage area in the basement. But now, hearing the faint, described metallic shifting sounds, I didn't just hide in the office. I would retrieve the heavy iron bar. I wouldn't seek confrontation, but I would stand near the source, often just outside the locked door, holding the bar firmly, projecting silent intent, boundary enforced. More often than not, the clinking would falter, then cease, the presence seemingly deterred by the iron and my focused vigilance. Evasion, yes, but now backed by the threat of active defense. Rule 3, thankfully, hadn't repeated. I dreaded the thought of arriving to find another unscheduled client prepared by unseen hands. My first action upon starting every shift was a cautious, tense visual sweep of the embalming room from the doorway. Silver probe kept ready in my pocket. My life became this, a cycle of mundane duties, cleaning, paperwork, receiving scheduled arrivals, punctuated by moments of intense, quiet vigilance, managing the threshold against the unseen. My past failure, the freezing inaction, was replaced by a constant, weary readiness. The tools, the iron bar leaning near my office door, the silver probes kept accessible on my person during rounds, were extensions of my will, symbols of my accepted role. Tonight, the desert wind howls outside, a low moaning sound against the building. Inside, the funeral home is quiet. I'm finishing paperwork at the desk in the office, the safe room. Then I hear it, a soft, deliberate clink, scrape, clink, emanating clearly from the locked embalming room down the hall. The presence is active. I pause, listening intently. The sound continues, methodical, unhurried, not aggressive, just present, doing whatever it does with the tools it sometimes accesses despite my precautions. I don't panic. I calmly save my work. Stand up. Pick up the heavy iron bar. Its weight familiar now. Check the beam on my own high-powered flashlight. Then, I walk to the office door, unlock it, and step into the dimly lit hallway. I don't head towards the sound to investigate. Rule 2 still holds. But I don't just retreat into hiding either. I walk slowly, deliberately, down the corridor towards the embalming room door, stopping about 10 feet away. I lean the iron bar against the wall beside me, easily within reach, and I wait, listening, watching the cold steel door. The clinking from inside falters, then stops. A moment of heavy silence, then a faint sighing sound, like air escaping old bellows, whispers from beneath the door. It knows I'm here. It knows I'm ready. I stand my post. The silent attendant, the guardian armed with iron and silver and hard-won knowledge. The final sound isn't a scream or a clang, just the low, steady hum of the funeral home's ventilation system, and my own quiet, vigilant breathing, holding the line against the darkness in the heart of the Nevada desert. The shift continues,